They called it the Crucible, a trial forged in the minds of the Vocarii thinkers, meant to measure sentience not by knowledge, but by resilience. One by one, the species came. The Silinae with their crystalline minds shattered first, their ambassador collapsing into a mental feedback loop before the second phase began. The Athari tried to brute force their way through it, but phase 3 dissolved them into twitching wrecks of instinct and panic. The trend sent an AI proxy, confident no organic could endure what a neural mesh could simulate. The AI screamed until it melted. The overseers of the council began to worry. This was not meant to destroy. It was meant to reveal. Then came the Deathworlders. Humans. The word tasted like rust and ozone when spoken by elder tongues, a species from a planet where the weather hunted you, the ground poisoned you, and the wildlife ran psychological warfare against infants. The council tried to dissuade them. Too dangerous, too cruel, too costly, ***, the humans grinned. Not diplomatically, **ferally. They sent in a woman named Captain Maeve Scrapjaw Delaney, a grizzled spacer with a missing eye and a tendency to chew detonator caps when bored. Following her was Dr. Elric Sanjo, a biologist who once cataloged a carnivorous fog. And then Yanko Clutch Virek, ex-Marine, known for breaking gravity harnesses with his bare hands. The Crucible welcomed them with jagged teeth and illusions that fed on memory. The first phase dragged them through simulations of failure, hopelessness, and despair calibrated to break entire civilizations. Maeve lit a cigarette mid-simulation and asked if it came in hard mode. Elric took notes. Yanko took a nap. Phase 2 introduced psychic fragmentation. Every human saw their worst fears, family deaths, lost comrades, and extinction-level Earth. Maeve snorted and said, ** been there. Bought the t-shirt. * Yanko asked if punching the fear constructs was allowed. Elric theorized the Crucible was harvesting emotional signals and began intentionally misfiring thoughts into the feedback loops. Phase 3 turned hostile. It began learning from them, mutating. The test creators hadn't considered that a species would push back, laugh at fear, enjoy stress. The Crucible adapted. So did the humans. The environment shifted, pulsing like a living wound. Maeve started calling it Frank. Yanko introduced Frank to his plasma axe. Elric started feeding it corrupted human memes, which made it glitch and echo with static screams of Shrek is love. The overseers watched in horror. The humans weren't surviving the Crucible. They were hijacking it. A Vocarii thinker named Thalsheen whispered, they are teaching it to suffer. The Crucible began leaking data. Anomalous laughter files, corrupted decision matrices, and something that sounded like human karaoke. The council panicked. They designed the ultimate test of psychological endurance and existential terror. The humans were treating it like a theme park. Maeve found the central nexus and started arguing with it. Listen, Frank, I know existential dread. I've dated it. You're just a moody escape room. Yanko renamed it Chuckleforge. Elric asked if they could take it home and study it. The Crucible begged them to leave. And yet, the test had only just begun. The humans had seen something inside it. A signal. A beacon buried deep within the data storms and cognitive traps. A message not from the Vocarii, but something older. Something watching them through the layers of code and agony. And it was laughing back. Maeve narrowed her one good eye at the shifting walls of the Crucible, which had now begun to sweat. Yes. Sweat *. Digital condensation that evaporated into the scent of engine grease and burnt toast. You feel that, she muttered, waving a hand through the mist as the data vapor curled around her fingers like it had intent. Yanko looked up from where he was prying open a pulse hatch with his axe. Feel what? The weeping walls? The fact this whole place smells like my grand's kitchen after a migraine. Maeve shook her head slowly. No, it's watching us. Not the council. Not the Vocarii. Something deeper. Elric, who had been muttering to himself in fractal math and humming an off-key sea shanty, paused. His pupils had dilated to vertical slits. There's a recursive pattern in the substrate layers. It's folding dimensions like origami. This place isn't just a test anymore. It's a channel. A channel to what? Yanko asked, standing upright and cracking his knuckles with a sound like tectonic plates shifting. Elric turned, face oddly calm. Something that's been waiting for a species stupid enough to poke back. The Crucible responded with a pulse. Lights dimmed, gravity staggered. Time lagged for 0.7 seconds, then rebounded. Words etched themselves across the walls in jagged, flickering sigils no one recognized, but the humans understood them anyway. Not because of translation, because they were felt. You are not the first to laugh, Maeve grinned. No, but we're the first to laugh on purpose. The floor beneath them cracked, revealing a slow spiral downward, impossibly deep, glowing with an indigo light that bent at odd angles. The council, watching from orbit, lost telemetry. The Vocarii thinkers began to scream in chorus. Somewhere in the Crucible, a door opened that wasn't part of the original design. The humans looked at each other. Yanko shrugged. Down we go. Elric was already stepping in, scribbling notes on a half-melted data tablet. Definitely going down. May flicked her cigarette stub into the void. Ladies first. They descended. The spiral wasn't made of matter. It was made of memory. Their own. All of it. Childhoods, nightmares, betrayals, the taste of rain on Mars, the sound of a sibling's voice lost in a reactor fire. Not illusions, asterisk replays, asterisk raw. Untouched. Not even the Crucible was piloting this part. The walls whispered things only they should know. And yet they weren't afraid. They were curious. At the base of the spiral stood a monolith, 10 meters tall, faceted like a black diamond, but pulsing with heartbeat rhythm. As they approached, it rippled, and a voice, no, a feeling, emanated from it. You are noise. Glorious, chaotic noise. Maeve approached and placed a hand on it. Her fingers sank slightly into the surface. We prefer the term creative entropy. The monolith trembled. The Crucible systems were now fully silent. No surveillance. No control. No audience. They had gone off script. And that was when it answered. Not in words. In echoes, flashes of long-dead stars, wars fought in pure thought, ancient beings folding time like paper cranes. Something trapped had built this trial, not as a test of worth, but as a key. And humanity had stumbled in laughing, cursing, and punching simulations until the lock turned. We're not the test takers, Elric whispered, eyes wide. We're the combination. The monolith split. Not apart, asterisk open. Asterisk inside was not a room. It was a presence, waiting, watching, hungry, not for flesh, not for fear, but for stories. It had been alone for too long. It reached out, and the humans did not recoil. Maeve lit another cigarette, took a long drag, and exhaled. All right, Frank, let's see what's behind curtain number hell. And they stepped through. They stepped through, and the universe changed shape. There was no sensation of motion, no shift in gravity, no blinding flash or thunderclap. Just difference. One breath they were standing before a cracked black monolith inside the Crucible's hollow spiral. The next, they were somewhere else entirely. A place that didn't have space, just context. Everything shimmered, not with light but with meaning. Colors that meant sorrow. Geometry that tasted like nostalgia. Sound that triggered goosebumps from memories they'd never lived. Yanko blinked, then blinked again. Did we just walk into someone's brain? No, Elric said slowly, spinning in place as non-existent air brushed across his face like a lover's whisper. Worse, we walked into their dream. Maeve scratched her neck, where the air felt like velvet sandpaper. Why the hell does it smell like a used library and my grandfather's aftershave? The dreamscape adjusted. Shifted. It was reacting to them. Their thoughts. Their stories. Every step forward birth fragments. Scenes. Half-built characters. Conversations that began mid-sentence and dissolved into questions. A boy cried on a swing set made of stars. A spaceship grew leaves and whispered lullabies in binary. A war played out between shadows using weapons made of regret. And then the presence finally spoke again. Asterisk brought noise. Flavor. Variation. Asterisk. Asterisk, you carry the virus of chaos. The sacred infection of narrative. Asterisk. Asterisk, you are the broken rhythm I have been waiting for. Asterisk. Maeve exhaled. All right, I'm flattered, but you still haven't said who or what you are. The response came as a feeling, a weight in the chest, a tightening behind the eyes, and a name that had no vowels, only intent. It had been left behind eons ago, locked within the Crucible by builders who feared it. Not because it was evil, but because it created. It twisted structure. It unraveled logic. It told stories that infected civilizations and made them question purpose, fate, and entropy itself. It was, for lack of a better term, narrative incarnate. A force that remembered being worshipped when species still painted on cave walls. Now forgotten, buried, but humans, they fed it every myth, every lie, every dream of flying, every fear of darkness, every joke told on a deathbed. They were walking story engines. You want us to set you free, Elric said, his voice half awe, half suspicion. The presence didn't confirm. It didn't need to. The spiral, the test, the bait, it had been waiting not for strength, not for wisdom, but for someone who would twist the rules just by showing up. And humanity? Humanity twisted everything. Maeve turned to the others. All right, I'm not saying we unseal the cosmic story god locked inside the galaxy's worst escape room. But what if we did? Yanko grinned. If it kills us, I call dibs on the epic one-liner. The dream space pulsed. Patterns aligned. The Crucible, now a husk far behind them, began to decompile. Its purpose had been fulfilled. Outside, across the galaxy, overseers watched as their god machine collapsed in on itself. Council members screamed. Ships fled. Some tried to nuke it from orbit. Their weapons melted mid-flight into poetic metaphors and fell as rain made of glass violins. And still, the humans moved forward, deeper into the dream, toward the core. Behind them, a new voice echoed from nothing. A young voice. Human. A child's whisper, is it story time yet? Maeve froze. So did the others. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a transmission. External from real space. Someone or something was listening in. Elric tapped his comms. That didn't come from the Crucible. Where then? Yanko asked. Elric paled. From Earth. And then the presence laughed. It sounded like every laugh that ever mattered. First laughs, last laughs, laughter at funerals, giggles in rain. It wrapped around them like gravity. You brought your world with you, it said. And now the tale infects both ends. They had opened the door. Now the story was spreading. The presence pulsed, and the dreamscape shuddered, no longer ambient and abstract, but focused. Sharpening, like a lens adjusting on a target. The spiral was gone. The strange geometries faded. Now they stood in what looked absurdly like an alleyway in old Chicago. Rain falling in sheets, neon buzzing, a trash fire crackling inside a rusted barrel. Except the sky above wasn't sky. It was a writhing, infinite eye, peering in. Okay, Maeve said slowly, flicking water off her jacket. Either we've been dropped into a vintage Earth sim, or the universe's weirdest memory decided to cosplay Noir. Noir with an omniscient eyeball, Yanko muttered, tapping his axe against the alley wall. It made a sound like bone chimes. Elric stared at the skyline. Buildings blinked. Signs rearranged their letters when not directly observed. In the puddles, reflections smiled back before the humans did. This isn't a memory, he whispered. It's a testing ground. A rewrite space. It's building narrative from what we know. But why Earth? Maeve asked. Because Earth is messy, the presence responded not in their heads, but through the mouth of a broken vending machine that spilled out Ken's labeled regret and triumph. Your world contains contradictions, paradox, emotion without logic, patterns that break and still function. You are narrative poison. Maeve cracked a grin. That's the nicest thing a vending machine's ever said to me. Then the alley split. Not physically, but conceptually. One moment became two. Two roads forward. One filled with blinding light, sterile and ordered. Lines of code wrapped around towers of reason. The other was chaos incarnate. A jungle of impossible machines, children with weaponized laughter, songs that shattered glass, beasts made of metaphor. They could choose. You're giving us a branching path, Elric said, eyes wide. Classic narrative structure. Divergence for the sake of contrast. I am contrast, the presence replied. But you will not walk it alone. Shapes emerged from the shadows. Human shapes. But not quite. They were characters. Echoes. Maeve saw a man in a bloody flight suit. Her old commander, dead over Titan, eyes bright with life. Elric faced a younger version of himself, the one who still believed science could fix his brother. Yanko met a woman with half his face and none of his rage, his twin, lost in the polar war. These weren't illusions. They were possibilities. Choose, the presence said. Not the path. The story. Which one do you tell next? Maeve turned slowly between the two roads. You said we brought Earth with us, she murmured. Then let me tell you something about Earth. She stepped forward, not toward light, not toward chaos, but between. Into the seam where storylines overlapped, where genre broke, where archetypes blurred. Her boots made sound even though there was no surface. Yanko and Elric followed without hesitation. Behind them, the alley began to fold into itself. Not collapse, asterisk published star. Entire segments of the Crucible's collapsed data structure were reformatting into narrative packets, shooting out into the galactic meshnet. Other species began receiving strange transmissions. Audio files of laughter, images of humans dancing through firestorms, riddles embedded in ancient languages they never spoke. Humanity's presence was no longer physical. It was mimetic. Some worlds tried to block it. Others tried to decode it. A few laughed along. Far above, in the Council's observation core, chaos had bloomed into full panic. The Crucible was gone. The humans were missing. The dream space was growing, unstoppable, recursive, impossible to isolate. It had bled into their simulations, their language AI, their religious archives. A junior analyst played one corrupted audio log and started crying halfway through, laughing, then crying again. He later painted his walls in spirals and began writing poetry in the language of extinct stars. Back in the liminal seam, Maeve held out her hand. The presence hesitated. You want a story, she said. Then listen closely, because this is where it gets good. And something listened. Something that hadn't stirred in epochs. Not the presence, not the one trapped in the Crucible. Something deeper. It moved. Not in space, not in time, but in theme. A title began writing itself across the air, in fire and memory. Maeve could feel it crawling behind her thoughts. Elric, Maeve said quietly, glancing at him without turning her head. I feel like we just signed up for something. We did, he replied, eyes glowing faintly with reflected metaphors. But we weren't the only ones who heard it. Yanko had already turned around, axe lowered. Behind them, the seam, the liminal between space, was teeming now. Beings were emerging, pulled in not by force, but by curiosity. Not just humans, other species. Ones that had failed the Crucible. Ones that had never even attempted it. The Tren, the Silinear, the Athari. Dream forms of extinct civilizations shimmered like radio ghosts on the edges of the scene. They were drawn by the noise, the laughing, because humans had not just passed the test. They had corrupted it into something new. You made a stage, the presence said, voice now fracturing into dozens of layers. I built the cage. You shattered it. You fed me noise. Now I must feed you narrative. Reality hiccuped. The sky above turned into a page being written in real time. Massive letters scraping across existence. Suddenly everything exploded outward, not into chaos, but a scene. They were on a battlefield. Not war. Astra's symbolic conflict star. A theater of narrative tropes in full swing. Ships shaped like swords clashed with monsters made of betrayal. Heroes screamed monologues at dying stars. A planet sobbed as it split open, revealing a child holding an olive branch made of plasma. Maeve ducked instinctively as a projectile the size of a moon skimmed overhead and turned into a moral dilemma mid-flight. What is this? It's testing story logic now, Elric shouted, grabbing her arm. We're inside narrative physics. This isn't symbolic. This is structural conflict. It's throwing genre at us. I hate genre rules. Yanko roared, smashing an incoming space dragon made of prophecy with his axe, which now glowed with backstory. But they adapted. Of course they did. Humans were raised in narrative, born into bedtime stories, baptized in film, aged in myth, and buried in eulogies full of irony and love. No matter what the battlefield threw, villain redemption arcs, love triangles armed with sincerity bombs, betrayals with foreshadowing sharp as razors, they fought with tools they'd always had. Wit, grit, subtext. Maeve realized what they were really inside, not a trap. The presence was giving them raw narrative, testing how they shaped it, how they bent tropes, defied cliches, broke fourth walls, and still made it work. And they weren't the only ones learning. From the edges, those other species were starting to adapt. A Silinear diplomat tore off her crystalline outer shell and began crafting poetry that turned enemy ships into apologies. An Athari warhound stopped mid-charge and redefined its purpose as a guardian instead of a killer. Something ancient and avian rose from the flames singing opera about forgiveness, and the fire stopped burning. The story was spreading. Not the same one. It was mutating, personalizing, infecting. The presence whispered again, "Odd now, you didn't break the Crucible. You repurposed it. You've made the test into an engine." Maeve stood at the center of the storm, cigarette half gone, hair floating in the updraft of metaphor, and grinned like a feral prophet. "We're not Deathworlders because we kill," she said. "We're Deathworlders because we survive every narrative you throw at us, and then we write a better one." And then, as if the story itself had heard her, the sky split open once more, and something stepped through. Not the presence, not another echo. Something new, something that had never existed until the words gave it shape. The thing that stepped through the split sky wasn't a monster. It wasn't a god. It wasn't an enemy. It was a protagonist, but not a singular being. No lone chosen one. No perfect hero with tragic backstory and fated destiny. It was a composite, an embodiment. A towering figure made of flickering voices, shared moments, millions of choices stitched together by conflict, love, defiance, absurdity. It had Yenko's wild laughter, Maeve's jagged grin, Elric's cold brilliance, and the spark of 1,000 unnamed humans who had faced the void and said, "Not today." The presence, the original one, the ancient caged storyteller, shuddered as it looked upon this impossible narrative construct. "You are not the noise," it said. "You are what follows the noise." Maeve looked up at the figure, eyes shining, voice steady. "We didn't pass your test. We rewrote the syllabus." The composite protagonist moved. Its very existence stitched the broken battlefield into a tapestry of new order. Not hierarchy, not dominance, but collaboration. Chaos didn't disappear. It was tamed, given shape, folded into arcs, conflicts, resolutions, sequels. And the Crucible? Gone. Replaced. Its structure had collapsed entirely, not from violence, but from irrelevance. Across the galaxy, other species stopped asking what the test was. They started asking what their story would be. A cultural pandemic of myth-making erupted. Broken systems toppled. Prophecies were rewritten. New religions formed, not around saviors, but around storytellers. The council? Dismantled by its own citizens, who began writing satire so potent it warped local laws into parody and then into reform. The humans? They returned to Earth, or at least their signal did. Maeve stood on a rooftop in New Buenos Aires watching a sky now filled with light from 1,000 rising narrative beacons, each one a species beginning its own myth. Yenko opened a beer with his teeth and muttered, "So what now?" Elric, older now, wearing a coat stitched with languages no one had yet spoken, simply smiled. "We wait," he said. "For what?" Maeve asked. Elric pointed to the sky, where, in slow, deliberate rhythm, new letters began to write themselves across the stars. Maeve shook her head, chuckled, and lit her last cigarette.